Warning: the following podcast might be too truthful for most liberals. Listener discretion is therefore advised.
Welcome to the Tea Party Power Hour. I am your host, Mark Galar. Today we are very excited to have Mr. Jake Novak on the show. Jake is a Middle East expert, a former media director at the Israeli Consulate, and a Columbia grad. So we're going to get his take on things that are going on at Columbia right now. He's also a political analyst, an editorial columnist, and he's the author of Jake's Takes on Substack, and he's been running national shows for about 30 years. He's here today to discuss what's going on in Israel and Gaza, and more importantly, how American universities are reacting to it. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I wish it were under better circumstances across the country, but always good to talk to you.
Now, you went to Columbia, and as you well know, there's a lot of support for Hamas at Columbia right now. I don't know if they're all students, but there's certainly stuff going. What's your take on the protest in general going on at universities around the country? All of them decidedly, pro-Hamas, pro-Gaza, anti-Israel.
Well, I think Columbia in some ways is a microcosm of all the universities. As you mentioned, I went to college there. I graduated in 1992, and absolutely no denial here. It always tilted left. Of course, it was much more of a liberal campus. However, when I was there, if you can believe it, on those same lawns where you see those tents right now and those same crazy protesters, we had a rally in 1991 against Saddam Hussein on the eve of the Gulf War, if you can believe it.
Wow.
So my point is that things got crazier. And that date is important to remember because it was the late 80s and early 90s when this started to happen, when some of the older professors who had been moderate, some of them they were classical liberals, but they were moderates, and many of them were even conservative, not only at Columbia, but certainly many other universities, started to retire. And they were encouraged to vote in and give tenure to very radical left-wing people with the understanding that those radical left-wing people would be open-minded as well when they had openings to fill. Of course, they weren't. That was the beginning of a problem. And then the next problem that happened was these universities that had started to get an avalanche of money, really in the 70s, that started to ratchet up. More and more money started coming into them, completely untaxed, of course. And they felt completely emboldened because universities like that became more and more of a thing. Listen, everyone, when I was in high school in the 80s, wanted to go to a great college, but it wasn't the high pressure thing that it became, thus driving up their asking price. So the tuitions were jacked up 6-7 times the rate of inflation over many, many years. And I don't care if you're Hunter Biden, the Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort, or Columbia, Harvard, or Yale, when you have that kind of crazy money coming in, you're going to start doing crazy things when you realize no one is stopping you. And one of the things they did is they started to hire crazy, crazy professors. They started getting addicted to money. So they took money from crazy sources like Qatar, like China, like Saudi Arabia, although the Saudis, of course, have changed their policies in the last 8 years and are much more moderate. But unfortunately, that took some while to develop. So what you're seeing, and this is important for everyone to understand, it isn't just anti-Semitism or Israel or anything that's on the forefront here. What every American should be concerned about, certainly taxpayers, is our institutions of higher learning have gone well off the rails for many decades now. Many of us have been warning about this for a long time. And actually, we're kind of lucky that it took this long to actually manifest. But that, of course, doesn't make us feel lucky now because this stuff has to be taken care of quickly because there are actual terrorists now involved in these groups. It isn't all just naive students, though that's a big part of it. But there are also some professional terrorists in these crowds. I know this for a fact. And so while we can still clear them with police and riot gear, we should before we do have to call in National Guard or God forbid, a SWAT team.
When you mention these terrorists, are they actually students at the school, or are they just coming in strictly for the protest? How have they infiltrated the student community to get students to aid them in their efforts?
Both. Some of them are registered students. Some of them are, grad students who have been deliberately placed, embedded on our campuses, Columbia, Yale, Harvard, Michigan, UCLA, Berkeley. But some of them are just wandering off from outside campus wearing the masks. This residual effect of the COVID mask nonsense is that we no longer have take a double, a few years ago, if we saw someone wearing a mask in public, we would make a double take. We would say, well,
Sure.
wait a minute, this doesn't look good. And now even the most libertarian among us don't make a big deal out of it, right? We just walk by. So they've taken advantage of that. So the answer is both. Some of them are actual students, some of them are actual employees, some of them are just walking on, coming from outside the university and sneaking in under these, with masks and other things or just blending in. And again, they are now, from what I've been told, under orders not to start anything, not to like bomb or shoot or do something like that, thank God. But we have to understand that they're ready to do so if something else starts a problem. If there's a major riot that starts, this is why we shouldn't engage with them. I'm all in favor of a counter protest across the street and all that kind of stuff. But as much as we all might want to go in and push and shove and get rid of them, leave that to the cops, because that's what they want from us. They want an excuse to start a George Floyd type burn the house down riot nationwide.
Speaking specifically about the American college students who are joining in this, do they really understand what they're advocating for? I mean, do they really get it? Because my history has been, when I confront a college student about global warming or about the idea that men can have periods, men can get pregnant, men can have babies, men can nurse babies. When we start talking about that stuff, they really don't put up a very good fight. They really don't have a lot of facts. So is this just something that's it's a current fad? I mean, if you're going to be with the hip liberal left-wing kids, you got to hate Israel, you have to hate Jews. I mean, how much do they really know about this? Because I know there was one effort to go out and find out. All these kids were yelling, from the river to the sea, and they were asking them which river and which sea, and they couldn't even tell them. So how much of this is legitimate hatred for Israel, and how much of it is wanting to be with the in crowd and do what the in crowd is doing?
It's legitimate hate. It's legitimate love of violence. But you're right. You are seeing a tremendous lack of information. And even the students who feel and believe that they have done some studying up on it, upon further investigation, it's just that they've watched a couple of videos. They've been indoctrinated. They've seen something. They've seen a documentary that was tilted and didn't include the facts. That's the best we can hope for. I've heard some people say, look, I support Israel and I support you and all that kind of stuff. But, there have been some great protest movements through the ages. Look at the anti-Vietnam folks. They got the war ended, and look at the civil rights guys. And I said, listen, how dare you? How dare you compare? Like, some of those anti-Vietnam protesters were disgusting and over the top, but no one can deny that they personally had a skin in the game because they were looking at getting drafted, and they certainly knew where South Asia was. They knew that Southeast Asia was. The civil rights people, of course, they were absolutely had quite a bit in the game and were quite informed about what was going on. So, to compare them to those people is a really tremendous insult, even to the worst radical anti-Vietnam radicals. It's an insult to them, too. And I'm not really that worried about insulting them. But in this case, it is. And so there's that problem, and by the way, even people who are supportive of Israel, in my experience, even in my own religious Jewish community, are not as educated as they should be on the history of Zionism, the history of the region. Obviously, my community is much more educated than those protesters, and they certainly know key dates and places and things like that. But I have urged a long time, and in fact, I would love to create a curriculum not only for Jewish schools, but for evangelical Christian schools or just schools in general, on how to get a nonpartisan, undeniable set of facts taught in AP. By the way, I don't think it should be required. That's another trick that some of these anti-Israel people do. They make it part of the curriculum. I mean, in California, where the kids can't read and write, they have required anti-Zionism classes in their public schools. It's a disgrace. I'd rather have them not have it, and any lessons than at all. But if you're taking an AP political science class or an AP world history class, I'd love to give them one chapter that they can do about this, that no one could deny any of these dates and facts. And that would really help stop a lot of the problem. But the last thing I'll say about that is, we're always told that education and fighting ignorance is the way that you destroy bigotry. And that's true in some cases. But unfortunately, that's not the case all the time. Make no mistake, the universities in pre-Nazi Germany were the best in the world. There's no denying they were. And yet they were some of the first places where the Nazis took hold. Albert Einstein was forced out of the German universities in 1932 well before the Nazis took over the government. So the idea that highly educated people aren't also hateful and bigots, this is something that we conservatives have been feeling the brunt of for years, and their hateful rhetoric against us is ludicrous. Of course, you can be highly, quote unquote, educated. You don't have to be just a dumb, ill-educated student not knowing what they're doing. Some of the people who are well-educated also are not really on the side of good and justice and decent side of history.
Well, I noticed that anytime you ask some of the college kids, what's your problem with Israel, they'll mumble something about occupying or genocide or, but you get an idea that, as you said earlier, maybe it's from watching a 90-second video or something.
Yeah.
Now let's go to Joe Biden for a second, as much as I don't want to. He's having to perform a little bit of a balancing act between the far left side of his party and some of, I guess, some of the older members of his party. I mean, even Bill and Hillary Clinton, came out and made statements supportive of Israel. So how does he perform? I don't even know how he walks without falling down, but how does he perform this balancing act and keep his party together as he deals with this issue?
Well, let's not make it sound harder than it really is for old Joe. I'm going to give you a spoiler alert.
Okay.
Joe Biden and most of the Democrats, and frankly, most of the elected Republicans too, have political consultants who are terrible at what they do. If you look at the polls, Joe Biden's weakness in the polls, that of course has gotten worse in the last months, isn't coming from the far left of the Democratic Party. It's coming from the middle. It's the John Fettermans of the world, although he personally isn't. It's the John Fettermans of the world who are abandoning Joe Biden. He doesn't have a tough juggling act at all. He should be much more supportive of Israel. It will help him in the polls. It will help him on the world stage. And he has idiotic political consultants, and not only idiotic political consultants, but let's also be honest, there are people in this administration and the Obama administration beforehand who hate Israel, who are agents of Iran, both paid and unpaid. We know this for a fact. It's one of the reasons why you're giving Joe Biden a pass when you say, like, well, he's worried about Michigan and Minnesota. Baloney. When was Barack Obama worried about Michigan and Minnesota when he inducted the Iran deal, when he gave them all that money, when he didn't have a peep about the 2009 riots in Iran for democracy? He wasn't worried about Michigan and Minnesota then because they weren't a problem. The problem is you have a pro-Iran State Department, you have pro-Iran people in the White House, and you have terrible political consultants who aren't aware of the fact, even though any idiot reading the polls can tell you this, that if Joe Biden sounded a little bit more like John Fetterman, he'd be up in the polls more than 10 points from where he is now. This is an incredible, this just goes to show how out of his hands this administration is. He doesn't this is, people would say when, before he was president, well, I didn't like Joe Biden, but he certainly was a shrewd politician. He knew how to do stuff. He couldn't run for president, but when he ran for Senate, he was smart about his campaigns. Well, if he isn't anymore, because he has absolutely, really, I really think that even a high school kid could see where Biden should come down on this. Now, it happens to also be the moral stand that he should be taking. But even if it weren't, this would help him in the polls. And whoever is consulting him is either a traitor to this country, and I think there are some people who are, or a complete idiot. That's a bad combination when you're trying to run the country and be the leader of the free world.
I read an article yesterday that eventually he's going to put a tax increase on the middle class that'll be the highest tax increase in 50 years. If that's true, he's really getting some bad advice. Who announces a tax increase prior to an election? It's just, it's absolutely crazy. In speaking of people that are pro-Iran and pro-Islam in the Congress, AOC, I would just love to ask her, you keep telling us the earth is going to be destroyed in 5 years due to global warming. If that's true, why are you so worked up about what's going on in Israel and Gaza? She actually believes that at least she says she believes that we're going to be, the earth isn't going to be here in 5 years. And it's just another example of the craziness that comes out of the left. Jake, I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm living in some kind of a bizarro world where up is down, down is up, left is right, right is left. Good is evil and evil is good. I just can't believe the things that people are willing to stand up in front of a microphone and say they believe in. I mentioned some of these things earlier about, men having babies. It's okay to put drag queens in kindergarten classrooms. Have we crossed the Rubicon? I mean, are we past the point of no return? Do you think we can be saved from this nonsense? What's your personal take?
My personal take is we would need not just one candidate, but an entire party. And obviously the Republicans would be the ones to do this if they can just get rid of some of the stragglers in the party who don't seem to know what time it is, to just push for the common sense things in opposition to everything you just said. In other words, say, look, we know there's some of our policies that some people don't like. So let's just be the party that says that men and women are women. Let's just be the party that says you want to be gay, you want to be straight, that's fine. But you can't force our children to learn about sexual activity until they're 18 years old or let's say, I'm sorry, high school age, like a regular sex ed class. We are not going to allow biological males to compete in women's sports. They can do it all they want in their own league. You want to start a trans league? Go for it. We will give you a tax break. You can use public, like everyone else gets if they're a non-for-profit charity league. Go for it. But you can't do it in the public schools and on public property. If you just had those kinds of policies, I think that they would do very well. I think that we crossed the Rubicon that was crossed was in the middle of the Gulf War. We had 9/11 and then that lead up to the Gulf War. And then about 6 months after the Gulf War started, the George Soros funded attacks on George Bush started. Not just, it would be one thing if they were just saying, hey, we think that this is a bad policy. Remember, they started running commercials basically saying that George Bush had lied his way into the war and that he had deliberately done so. Now, I felt like that was a line that was crossed to the point where you're really saying, that's a high crime and misdemeanor, and you're just putting that on a TV commercial and you're okay with it. I think that was when we crossed the line. There's also another thing going on, which is that it's such bad news that it's led to some good news in that we have so many foreign entities and powers controlling this country that it's actually saved us because all of them can't really no one of them can actually take control of it. We got China in control of so many of our businesses. We have Iran in charge of so many of our political groups and campuses. We have Russia doing all kinds of bad stuff too. But between those 3 or 4, and they have the cartels, controlling our border. Between those 4 entities, they're fighting for control so much that we continue to have the semblance of our own autonomy. But all joking aside, we it's like if you know your history, we're starting to resemble pre-Boxer Rebellion China, and when everyone and his brother from a foreign country was running China like their own mob territory. So that's not good. We don't want that. And I think if we just had a common sense type of message, and I feel like President Trump is sort of going in that direction. You can see the way he's talking about abortion, trying to push a more common sense message. But, he's being hamstringed now by all these trials. Sure. He has to resist the temptation to talk about his trials when he goes. I mean, he's at a courthouse, but he should take advantage of that by just pushing a common sense message and then maybe giving them one answer about these trials. But that's, of course, that's the purpose of these trials, to keep him not off the campaign trail, because the campaign trail doesn't mean anything anymore, sadly, but to keep him off message.
What's your prediction on the hush money Alvin Bragg trial?
I see almost no way that he isn't convicted. That's the whole point of this trial. The jury seems to be completely impossibly tilted against him. The judge is impossibly tilted against him. The only question is whether or not they will really try to put him in jail. That's a very dicey issue, as many of you understand, because of Secret Service, because of other things like that. But I think that we're deluding ourselves if we think there's going to be a mistrial, if we think there's going to be an acquittal. This is an absolutely railroaded thing. It makes me so sad because the first thing I noticed when I moved to New York as a preteen was how much the people of the city had a bipartisan attitude about crime. You could have an all-black jury and they would convict a black defendant if he was guilty in a second. I saw that so many times when I was a kid growing up here in the 80s. Nobody cared about that kind of nonsense. It was a law and order type city, and it was among the people. And that was a great thing. And now we've gone to this point now where it seems like we're the opposite of that. And that's so dangerous. So, I mean, I think he's 100% going to be convicted. And I think the judge is then going to be wishing he did recuse, because when it comes down to how to sentence him, there's no way he's going to please everybody. He's not going to be able to please everybody no matter what he does in the sentencing. And I think there's going to be riots regardless, unless Trump gets the death penalty, which he isn't going to get. Obviously, there's going to be people burning stuff. And if he gets even a ridiculous sentence, even if he gets like a year sentence, which he's not going to get, but let's say he gets an actual jail sentence, it'll be like Detroit when they still burn down the city when they win the championship anyway. There'll still be riots in the streets after this verdict. and or after the sentencing, and I'm not happy about it, for to say the least.
I mean, when you look at everything from the statute of limitations running out to the fact that I originally was told that Bragg was tying a misdemeanor to a worser crime, supposedly a felony, which turned out not to be true. And that's how he got past the statute of limitations and all these other things. But now it's my understanding that and this has been said for a while, the more serious crime that supposedly the alteration of the accounting books was supposed to cover up is also a misdemeanor. So and as far as that goes, as you well know, the accounting error, or as if a CEO of a billion-dollar corporation enters his own stuff in the books, that took place in like 2017. So it took place after the election. So how does an accounting entry after the election affect the election? I mean, none of this even makes sense. It's an extremely weak case. It's a highly untested piece of law he's trying to put forth here. And I just can't imagine that anybody but Donald Trump could be convicted of this.
That's right. And, it's funny. I think when I see this going on and I see the destruction of our legal system to go after Donald Trump by people who are naive enough, we were talking earlier about these stupid college students, incredibly ignorant people in the legal justice system in this country who think that cutting down man's laws to go after the person they think of the devil will only result in the netting of the devil. I want all of your listeners to go rewatch this movie. You can watch it for free on YouTube if you don't want to try to find it. A Man for All Seasons, won Best Picture in the 1960s about Sir Thomas More. Wonderful, wonderful movie, fantastic movie, and a play before that. There's a great scene where one of Sir Thomas More's son-in-law says, "Oh, you should arrest that guy." And Sir Thomas says, "Why?" "Well, because he's a bad man." And he says, and Sir Thomas says, "Well, I would give the devil the benefit of the law, even the devil." And why would you do that? Because if you cut down all of man's laws to go after the devil, when the devil turns around on you, where are you going to hide now that all the laws are laid flat? These people are foolish. They ought to read up about the French Revolution. Alvin Bragg ought to read up about the Soviet Union, because one day they'll be sending him to the gulag. You get rid of these laws, then everyone is going to come, including the people who were the henchmen in your original decision to destroy these laws. This is no joke. Yeah, and you even had the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, when you had that civil trial and that civil judgment, publicly saying, no, this was just for Donald Trump. Businesses don't need to be worried. Don't worry. Don't leave New York. We're just going after Donald Trump. I mean, that should have caused an immediate overturn. You don't even have to appeal the case now. You have the governor of the state admitting that the trial was just jigged up for him, which is not legal. So they're destroying all of our laws to go after one person again, maybe you hate Donald Trump. Maybe you think he is guilty. Fine. But you have to understand the scenario you just described is the destruction of our legal system. And you are an historical ignoramus and incredibly naive if you think that won't come around and turn on you and you personally at some point if you don't stop it. And it doesn't look like anything is going to be done to stop it. And one day it'll be their turn, in the barrel. It's going to be a very bad situation. We have come to, we've been living kind of in a post-constitutional era for a long time, the way the Democrats have been subjugating the Constitution for decades. Now we're really getting to a point where we're almost in a sub-legal situation in this country. And it won't end well, especially for the people who think they were in control of the situation, because it gets out of control real fast.
When you look at all these cases against Donald Trump, it just seems like they're making so many exceptions to go after him. Take the E. Jean Carroll case. I mean, a basic he said, she said, there's so much wrong with that. I don't know where to start. I mean, she ripped the story off of an episode of Law and Order, if I'm not mistaken, right down to the name of the department store and the place in the department store where the rape takes place. She described the clothes she was wearing, but they've been able to document that that was an outfit she bought many years later. The statute of limitations had run out, but they opened up this 1 year open window of opportunity where you could bring these cases. That was done specifically to go after Trump. The way they're going after Trump with the Alvin Bragg trial, that's never been done before. This is an extremely untested piece of law, of legal maneuvering. And it's sort of like no matter what they do, I mean, you take what's going on down in Georgia, it's all based on a phone call. The phone call was recorded in Florida, which is a two-party consent state. They really shouldn't even be allowed to enter that into evidence, but they're going to do it anyway. I had a guest on recently who wrote a book in part about Mussolini. It was Kent Heckenlively, and we were talking about this, and the current American liberal is kind of doing what dictators do. We're going to do whatever in the hell we want, and we're going to dare you to stop us. And I mean, yeah. I never thought it would get this far, but go ahead.
Yeah, and I have to say that the thing that has discouraged me the most is that you can count on one hand the people who don't support Donald Trump, who have still come out and spoken out about this destruction of the legal system and all the dirty tricks against him. You shouldn't have to like Donald Trump to be able to see this. And it's not just because of courage, and it's not just it's really because, it's not because, a lot of people see it who hate Trump. They don't have the guts to come out and say it. No, it's not because of that. It's because their hatred has made them stupid. It's sad that only somebody like Jonathan Turley, who is not a Trump supporter, has been, one of the loudest and most sane and consistent voices against the dirty tricks against Donald Trump. It's insane. Too, yeah. Alan Dershowitz, a couple of people like that. Why is that? I have so many friends who are really good lawyers, and yes, they're liberals, and yes, they hate Donald Trump, who are all okay with this. Who, if I had said any other name even a year or so ago, I mean, now they would know I was kind of talking about Trump. But if I just use any other name or just a generic name, they would say, like, look, you can't do that. And it wouldn't even be a question. And it's a good example of a little bit of what I was talking about before. Those geniuses at those German elite universities who still became as rabidly anti-Semitic as any illiterate person in a beer hall in Munich. Didn't matter. And hatred like this absolutely makes you stupid and makes you do stupid things. And you've got to rise above it. I don't believe that there's actually any reason ever for any kind of hatred. It's a little bit of a variation on that hate the sin, love the sinner kind of thing. Hatred is really is an emotion. There's nothing you can really do with it that's positive. You can say, I don't like this, and we should stop a certain thing from happening. But hate to me connotes an overreaction. People showing an emotional response, not acting logically. We got to be like Mr. Spock here. And it's just, this is a great, at some point, if we survive as a race, as a human race, there will be scientists studying this a couple hundred years from now who will talk about the mania that overcame all of the Western world, but particularly the United States, when it came to the reactions to Donald Trump and how people allowed their hatred to burn their own house down.
I want to ask you a couple of things more things about Trump. Trump has said that if he were president right now, what happened on October 7th wouldn't have happened. They wouldn't have dared to do this on his watch. Do you agree with that?
I mostly agree with it. First of all, everyone has to understand that when you look at October 7th and you look at the things that have happened since, the American public has absolutely paid for it. We allowed for this money to go to Iran. And even though we were told over and over again during the first the Iran nuclear deal under Obama, and then the added money that Biden has freed up for them to go there, and with, of course, all the sanctions that they haven't imposed, we were told by all the experts that this would absolutely lead to an increase in terrorism. All Iran does, Iran has one GDP, has one economic product. That's terror wars. That's all they do. I know they have oil, but their oil is used to fund their terror wars. And if you don't want to take my word for it or the defense experts' word for it, how about we take the Iranian people's word for it, who risked their lives, and many of them lost their lives in 2019 and 2020, protesting in the streets against the government. And the chant was, we don't want our money going to the Palestinians. We don't want our money going to Hezbollah. They were warning us about this the whole time. So absolutely, the scale of the attacks would not have been anywhere near possible if Trump were still president. So that's one thing. The second thing, though, is that these attacks were meant as in the hopes of encouraging or discouraging, I should say, the United States from promoting any more peace agreements in the region. Donald Trump played this huge role in getting the Abraham Accords signed, which brought the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and some other countries to a real peace deal. And by the way, a warm peace deal, not like the peace deal with Egypt and Jordan where they're just not shooting at each other, but there's been cultural exchanges. You know, when I was at the Israeli Consulate, we were meeting and having these friendly meetings, which continue to go on, and just and frankly, just having fun with Emiratis and people from Bahrain. I mean, it was a wonderful exchange of our cultures. We were having a good time. You don't have that with the Egyptians or the Jordanians. So this was a great, and Iran doesn't want that. Now, under Donald Trump, there was nothing Iran could have done to discourage Trump from continuing that process, getting Saudi Arabia to sign on the dotted line as well. But under Biden, they knew they could do something. And the hopes, and by the way, this is the one big piece of good news we've had since October 7th. Despite the fact that the Emiratis and the Bahrainis have said a few things that haven't been so great since October 7th, despite the fact that the Saudis have said a few things that haven't been so great since October 7th vis-a-vis Israel, they haven't pulled back a bit from the Abraham Accords. And they are basically still full speed ahead, especially from an economic standpoint, on these partnerships. But what Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah were hoping to do was to derail all that stuff, something that I don't think they would have even tried under Trump because Trump took such individual pride over these particular agreements, whereas Biden, you know, didn't care about them.
Well, Jake, I have to ask, I mean, you're such a knowledgeable man. Is there anything else you want the American people to know about this conflict that's taking place currently between Israel and Hamas that we haven't covered so far in this interview?
Yeah, well, the most important thing is if you ever hear somebody saying that Israel wants American troops or sailors put in harm's way and sent to the region to protect Israel, or if you ever hear anyone saying that that's, you know, what's going on, they don't listen to them. It's probably someone who's lying and trying to get, you know, to trap someone into something. There is absolutely no need for American troops, whatever, to get ever in the way, in harm's way for Israel. There's never been an American soldier who died for, or, you know, defending Israel, and there never should be. All we need is for America to stop giving the enemies of not only Israel but civilization all this gosh darn money. Cut it off. You don't want to give Israel more money? Fine. Stop giving money to its enemies, and then you'll save a lot of money. You'll save on both accounts. That's the most important thing I can say. I'm so frustrated when I hear people say, like, well, you know, those people in Israel, I support them, but they want my boy to go over there and protect them. No, they don't. Okay, that's not what anyone wants. Not here in the United States and not in Israel. That's the first thing. The second thing is when people say this is a complicated issue, I don't understand. Please. Let me give it to you in just 2 sentences or maybe less.
Sure.
Since 1933, the Palestinian people have been offered more than 12 opportunities for a path to statehood. They have turned down every single one for the same reason. They will not accept a Palestinian state as long as a Jewish state exists. They would rather all die than for the Jews to have a state of any kind. I don't know how many times they have to tell us this for us to listen. They're not hiding it. They keep telling us over and over. To say that the two-state solution or some kind of two-state option is something that the Israelis are blocking or the Americans are blocking is an obtuse, ignorant, and really seditious lie. It's the other way around. The Palestinians have never been interested in a state. They just want all the Jews gone. Try to figure this out because they keep telling it to us. And that's the answer. Until you have some Palestinian leaders who say, okay, we'll live with them for real, a leader to say it for real, then we don't have to worry about how complicated this issue is because it isn't. It's very, very straightforward.
Jake Novak, I want to thank you for being here today. And before you go, please tell my listeners how they can follow you. I know you've got something on Substack, you've got on X. Give us the many ways that people can follow you.
Yeah, I have a lot of subject matter on Substack, including a lot of financial news and a daily news roundup. It's jakenovak.substack.com, and my name is spelled the normal way, Jakenovak. So jakenovak.substack.com, and I'm very, very active on X. My X handle is @JakeNY, and you'll see a lot of stuff. And really, if you just go to those 2 places, you'll be informed about anything else that I might be doing somewhere else as well. So those are the 2 places, and please check it out.
Jake, I appreciate what you're doing. It's sad to say, but we live in a world where it takes courage to speak the truth. You're always go ahead.
To me, it's more of a suppression thing. You know, I was so happy to be able to be speaking on the radio and TV yesterday after Mike Johnson went to Columbia University, because if I weren't on the air, I'd be shouting it outside just because it was a great opportunity. That was such a great moment, a one bright light in some of the dark days we've had. And I'm just so glad. So, yeah, I mean, it may take courage to speak out, but it would take much more willpower for me to shut up. So I'm glad you've given me the opportunity.
We need more like you, Jake. We definitely do.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. Look forward to having you back sometime soon.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Tea Party Power Hour with Mark Gillar.